Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dracaena Wines. I am your host, Lori, and today I'm going a little up north and we are talking Cab Franc, and everybody knows how much I love Cab Franc. So we have Bruce and Rhonda Prothro of Prothro Vineyard, Family Vineyards. Did I pronounce the name correctly? That's the first question.
Surprisingly so. Most people don't, but you did. And it's Prothro Family Wines.
Okay. Oh, that note, I shoved the vineyard in there. I'm sorry. Prothro Family Wines. So welcome. So I have to start off before we really get into the interview. I have to start off with, as soon as I went to your website, I started laughing because the very first thing I saw was that Bruce was a chemist and fell in love with wine, and Rhonda had to listen to him. And I just thought that was hysterical. So I get the science thing. My husband is a food chemist. I'm a microbiologist. We actually often joke, like when we're out to dinner, we're having a conversation that is chemistry oriented. And we joke, somebody at the next table must think we're like lunatics, or what are we really talking about, or whatever. But I also get the yes, dear. But Bruce, you brought her along. She came around strong with loving the wine, huh?
Well, it's persistence. It's persistence and repetition, right? If you start talking about something and keep talking about something, they eventually come around.
They break it down. They break down.
Actually, eventually. No, that's not. That's not the story. Rhonda's much better at telling it than I am. Our second date was our first date. Our first date was in Napa.
Oh, you went wine tasting on the first date, huh?
Wine tasting on the first date.
It was a very long time ago.
That was 1988. And the really cool thing about it, we went up to Napa. Rhonda lived in Marin and I lived down in San Jose at the time. And I picked her up in Marin and we went up there. I think our first stop was Trefethen.
Okay.
And we had a pretty full day. Ended up having dinner up there in Yountville at a place that doesn't exist anymore, but it was Mama Nina's. Great, just down home Italian food. And we hit a lot of places and had a lot of conversations. Rhonda interviewed me at Pine Ridge. I was worthy of continuing dating. And we had our first kiss at Vista Tui. We like to say that was back in the day when you could just walk into a tasting room and taste. You didn't have to make appointments. You didn't have to pay $55 to $80 to taste something. People were friendly. They were receptive.
It wasn't an ordeal. And the only place that you had to pay was at Silver Oak, and it was $5. And it was only because you got the glass.
I remember that $5, right?
Yeah.
And you got the glass.
And it's funny, we were at Silver Oak and just tasting there, and we ended up going into the back room and having a little barrel sample and a little tour. And then they thought we were already married, even though it was our first date.
Wow.
It was an interesting time.
It was kismet right from the start.
Yeah. So our relationship started, in Napa, and it was a couple years later. You know this. It's as a scientist, it's easy to pick up a glass of wine and say, "Oh, I smell this. I smell this. I smell all of these other things. I get these secondary and tertiary," and that's fine. That's fine. That drives a lot of wine discussions and a lot of the sensory sort of perceptions of wine. But as someone with a scientific background, you go, okay, that's great, but why?
Right.
What's happening that has created that? And you want to know from beginning to end, much like any design of experiment, what creates that sense, the sensation and sense of response you're getting in the glass, not only on the palate, but in the aromatics, and how does that change over time? And yeah, you can explain it on a chemical basis, but no microbiologist or no chemist is worth their weight if they just do everything on the blackboard. You have to get in, you have to experiment. You have to, you have to put on the lab smock and the safety glasses, and you have to start playing with Bunsen burners and distillers and everything else.
The days of Bunsen burners.
And that's what we decided to do. Rhonda likes to say if she was going to have me be quiet, the best thing to do was to have me make wine and stop talking about it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say put a wine glass in my hand so I'm drinking it, but
I knew that he was never going to be happy until he actually could make wine. It was one of those things that he talked an awful lot about. And so we decided to be home winemakers and experiment. And it was, again, a long time ago, and back in the day where there was not an internet. Napa was very small. A lot of the wineries had winemakers who started out as home winemakers. And so they always kind of had a soft spot in their hearts for other home winemakers. And so we sourced grapes all over Napa and Sonoma and
Fairplay,
Foothills, all sorts of places. And it really started by Bruce just making phone calls to vineyard owners and pretty much talking our way into harvesting grapes. And then it ended up that one vineyard owner would tell another vineyard owner, and then Bruce would start getting calls saying, hey, we're getting ready to harvest, or this big winery is getting ready to harvest, and we have one little row, and if you want it, you can come the day before and take it. And so that's basically how it started. And so we did not have a truck at the time or any equipment. And so we borrowed it. We borrowed our neighbor's truck. We would drive to the vineyard. We would harvest it ourselves, harvest all the grapes ourselves. And then we would do on-site crushing and distillation. And then we would put all of the juice and the skins in big food grade garbage cans, and we would pick them up and put them in the back of the truck and drive them home to Los Gatos, where we lived at the time, and made wine in our garage.
It's funny because I can envision this, our first vintage, or wasn't official vintage, but our first hobby vintage or whatever, was all by hand. And even the bottling or the corking, the bottling were those like, I call them nipples. I don't know what they're really called, but you do that, and then the corking, oh my gosh, to put that cork in there. And I remember, right? It's like, oh, your arms, your shoulders are,
and your finger gets all red. Yeah, that's exactly what we did. Everything by hand. Everything by hand. We didn't even do a label.
Right.
We hand wrote.
Oh wow, it's like naked bottles, naked.
Yeah. And we just did it for home consumption and friends and family. But what happened is every time we would have a party, we would bring our wine out, and Bruce would always think that we needed to buy wine too, because he always felt a little uncomfortable about serving people only our wine. And then people would come over and start drinking wine, and inevitably our wine would be gone first. Right. And just would still be sitting there because people really, really liked our wine and started asking for it. And so we gave it away for like birthdays and Christmas, and we gave it all away. And we did make wine like that for 7 vintages.
8, from 91 through 98.
Okay. And we stopped when we had kids, and we just couldn't do it anymore. Career, kids. It was time for a hiatus.
But it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of fun, and once again, going back to kind of our shared lab sort of experience, you learn the most by doing.
Yes.
You can read the textbook, you can watch other people do the experiments, but being that hands-on and making all of the decisions along the way, having to do all of your racking by hand, having to clean all of your barrels yourself. And, we didn't make a small quantity of wine, we made a large quantity of wine in the garage. And our garage is full of wine barrels and fermentation vats and carboys. And, you know, we had a lot of fun doing it all by hand. And the really cool thing about it, and Rhonda hit on this, is that it was, you know, back in the day when a lot of people had started off as home winemakers. And we got a lot of help, you know, so we're self-taught. Back in the day, you could be self-taught and that had a certain amount of respect. Now, you know, you need to say you come from UC Davis and yada, 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 and people respect that. But we're self-taught. But we're self-taught by being guided by some of the icons of the industry back then.
I was going to say that I mean, your friends list is pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of help from David Bruce. So if you go back to the 76 Paris tasting, he had a Chardonnay that was entered in that. It finished last, but it finished last out of some pretty remarkable wines. So we got help from them. We got help from Dexter and Val Algren. And most people won't know. Go to Ashes and Diamonds sometimes and look at the Algren bottles they have on the shelves, because Algren sourced from Bates Ranch, and Ashes and Diamonds now makes a Bates Ranch cab from the Santa Cruz Mountains. Parker called their cabs the most underrated cabs in the state of California.
Wow.
Exceptionally long-lived and very nuanced and elegant. They helped us a lot. They started off as beer makers, turned into winemakers. Ken Burnap, who started Santa Cruz Mountain Vineyards, he taught us the whole secret to, you know, small lot fermentation, because it's really hard to hold, you know, that exothermic temperature generation on small lots versus large lots. So he, you know, gave us the trick. And
the trick was U-Haul moving blankets that you wrap around.
A little insulation.
Tape on. That was it.
Yeah.
Something so simple, but you wouldn't really think about it, you know.
We got a lot of help from Kent Rosenblum and Jeff Cohn. You know, unfortunately, Kent passed away, and Jeff is still very active, making, you know, some exceptional wines. And probably the most notable help we got was from Burt Williams.
William Somm.
Yeah.
And Rhonda does a great job telling that story.
Well, he didn't have a tasting room, and he made Pinots.
And everything was sold primarily mailing list.
Yes, and like really high-end, beautiful wine, a lot from Russian River. And we were making Russian River Pinot, and we were having difficulty with our fermentation, getting it right. And so we knew he made really great Pinot from Russian River. And so we scheduled an appointment, and we show up, and he is a salty old character and was not at all happy to see us. In fact, he had
been a pressman with the Chronicle.
The San Francisco Chronicle, bought the property and started making wine with a friend who was also a pressman at the Chronicle. He had some choice words for us when we showed up, and pretty much said, "Why the hell are you here? I don't taste wine. I'm not sure why you're here." And I looked at him and I'm like, "Well, we are home winemakers and we're making Pinot from Russian River, and everyone tells us you're the one to talk to." And as soon as I said that, he said, "Well, why didn't you tell me? Come on in." And
you're like,
we spent like 3 hours with him. Barrel
wow.
tape. I mean, we went, he would take out the buns and dropper, and we barrel tasted with him for hours, getting pointers, getting tips. He was hearing us stories. He was funny. And then at the very end, we were talking about the yeast that we were using and having, you know, just not, it wasn't quite right. I was trying to use Alsmanhausen, and Alsmanhausen produces a kind of slow, delicate, you know, kind of fermentation that doesn't really get going. And so you're not driving a lot of extraction. And so he takes out a piece of paper and writes on it and hands it to us. And he said, "Go to the wine lab and talk to this person and tell him that I sent you to purchase my proprietary yeast for your Pinot."
Wow.
And so access to his proprietary yeast, and said, if there are any issues, have them call me. We're like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool story.
That's impressive. That's amazing. I do think that the majority of wine people look out for other wine people. The majority of the majority of wine people look out for wine people, and the people who have come through the ranks versus those who have so much money, don't know what to do with it. So I'm going to start a
They're
winery.
rockstar winemakers,
Yeah.
or wineries, as we like to call them. Yeah,
It's a little different. It's a little
completely
different,
different.
you know. But that's incredible. And I'm assuming you are just keeping that house proprietary yeast and keep going every vintage.
Well,
We don't make Pinot anymore.
we don't make Pinot anymore.
Oh,
Right?
no Pinot. Okay.
No Pinot.
Okay.
So we
So
started
let's
off making Zinfandel.
Okay, so actually, I was going to ask you that because the first, when you were doing your home making stuff, you did Pinot, Zin, and Chard, right?
Mhm.
Those were so.
We
Were
also do
that?
Later.
Did you did you choose those varieties and then hunt down the vineyards that had them, or were those the varieties that you could get your hands on back then?
So when I was chomping at the bit to make wine, Rhonda and I went up to Russian River, just down the street from Deloach, back when
Okay.
Cecil owned Deloach. And Cecil was great. And back then Deloach was, a premium wine brand making, some really nice Russian River wines. And we stayed at a bed and breakfast just around the corner from there. And it was owned by the Lindys. And the Lindys provided Chardonnay, Pinot, and Zinfandel to Deloach. And Bob was also a home winemaker and had a nice little winemaking facility attached to his bed and breakfast. So, over the course of the weekend, we spent a lot of time talking to Bob and Denise about it. And he kind of showed me his setup and what he had. And then said, hey, I'll sell you grapes, come and buy some grapes, show up before Cecil harvests, and you can have Pinot and Chardonnay and Zin. And so that's how we got our first vintage going, was getting it from the Lindy vintage.
And we actually borrowed his equipment.
He later sold this French hand crank crusher destemmer to us, or no, Italian crusher destemmer that was really, really nice, which we used all throughout our home winemaking days. And then I sold it to another home winemaker. But yeah, we got our start, sourcing from there. And it's really an interesting story. So I did Chardonnay. I did a barrel fermented Chardonnay, but an American oak barrel, because I wanted to kind of follow the style that ZD was doing. I really liked ZD at that time. So we used American oak, and that's a little bit different than using French oak. And we made sure that we used air-dried American oak versus kiln-dried, so we wouldn't get the greeniness that you get sometimes from American oak. And it produced a nice Chardonnay, but I wasn't pleased with it. It's much like being a parent. You look at your kid and you see everything that your kid can do better, whereas everyone else is telling your kid's a great kid, and you're like, but they can do this better. And same thing with being a winemaker. You're satisfied with your wines, but you could have perhaps done things a little bit differently during the process. So that's how I felt about the Chardonnay. The Pinot, I actually put it into a reconditioned barrel that was infected. And so we had to dump it. Unfortunately, it took me 2 vintages to find out that it wasn't me as a winemaker, it was the infected barrel. It was a wonderful French oak barrel. But, if you can afford not to buy a used barrel, that's the risk you run if you do buy a used barrel. It's always better to get new. And then interesting story about the Zinfandel. So it was a late harvest in Russian River in '91. I think we picked right before Halloween. And the bricks were between 21.5 and 22.5. And we really wanted it to be around 23.5 to 24. And that was back in the day when you typically picked around 23.5. 24 was considered kind of the max, and it made, more of a claret style Zin. And so we didn't get the sugar levels we wanted. And when we brought it back, I inoculated it with Ausmusshausen and realized that I didn't get, a nice, hearty sort of exothermic reaction going on with, a heat-driven process. Ausmusshausen is a lot more, gentle. So I made this really nice Pinot looking Zinfandel with, you know, nice Russian River acidity, wonderful floral fruit on it. But it wasn't, you know, a big hearty Zin. And I was a little embarrassed about it. It drank nicely. It tasted wonderfully. I mean, wonderful. And you know, that's one of the ones that we'd serve at parties. Well, fast forward 30 years. So January of 2021, I get an email from a guy that I haven't talked to in 20 years, 25 years. And he was a home winemaker kind of in the same area. And we used to exchange notes and everything. He had a massive cellar. And once a year, in the first week in December, he would open his cellar and do a varietal tasting. So all of those iconic Zinfandels from like 68 to 85, you got the taste. There were 40 of them. That was one year. The next year, he did all those iconic cabs from 68 to 85, including the wonderful Stag Leap and the early Diamond Creek cabs. It was just wonderful tasting. But anyway, I had brought him a bottle at one of the tastings, and we had handwritten on the label. So in 2021, I get this email from him saying, hey, Sandy and I were going through the cellar and we found the bottle that you brought us of your 1991 Zinfandel. And we said, well, let's open this and see what it's like. And so they poured in the first half of it. And they had it that night, and they're like, oh my gosh, this Zin's 30 years old, but it's beautiful.
Wow.
Absolutely. And so they put, you know, that away. And then the next night had the remaining half. And he said that the second night, that bottle was even, you know, better. And he said it was absolutely spectacular. But you look at it, you know, we had, you know, a little bit higher acidity. It wasn't overly alcoholed. You know, not like today, and we were judicious on the oak that we used on it, and it just kind of, you know, speaks to trying to make a wine more balanced than trying to make a wine that's overly extracted or overly oaked. And you find that those wines, particularly, you know, you see it in the old world, those wines that are really made in that very balanced style tend to age really, really well. So it was nice to get that report card back on a wine that I made a lot of mistakes on, and to find out 30 years later, it was still holding up and drinking beautifully.
And you don't have any left.
Nope. Not a single bottle.
So let's just skip ahead a little bit. So that was when you first started, you were in the garage, then you said that you had children. And so you took a hiatus because, you know, children are so easy and take up zero time. So what was the time difference? When did you say, okay, kids, you are good on your own, I'm ready to go back to wine?
98 to 2016.
Okay. All right.
And so we moved to Austin, Texas in 2011.
Oh, okay.
And we, 5.5 years ago, we moved houses. And Bruce retired from his corporate job where he was traveling a lot, most of the time, actually. Our son was in college, and our daughter was a junior in high school. So we moved homes, and we were unpacking, and we were in our family room, and we came across a shoebox of old photos. So we sat down on the couch and started looking through these old photos, and we found the photos of us when we were home winemakers all those years ago. And we were much younger.
I had hair.
He had hair. And I had my mama jeans, which are now again popular. So looks like nothing's really changed. And we sat down and we looked at those photos, and we were like, we kind of want to reacquaint ourselves with those people. And so it just felt like it was a really good time for us to start talking and dreaming and thinking about what it would mean to make wine again. And this time we thought we would do it on a commercial basis. And so we were contemplating, thinking about it, and we were in New York, first time that he had ever been there, and we were at the Met, and he got a call from his old work asking about where he wanted a check to be sent, which was some incentive check compensation that he didn't know about. And
Those are
so
always good.
him and I found him and he told me about this. He's like, what do you want to do with this? And then I had the brilliant idea, why don't we use that for our seed money to restart making wine? And so that's what we did. And for us, it was kind of a journey. It was kind of a rediscovery. And quite frankly, it was a way for us to get reconnected with each other at this new and different time of our life.
Right.
And so
I get
what we decided to do was we didn't want to be landowners. We didn't want to be
Right.
farmers. We didn't want the capital expense of starting a wine operation. So we use a custom crush facility,
okay.
and we contracts with the vineyards that we use. It gives us some flexibility, and it allows us to get into winemaking without having to have the large capital outlay. Now, Rhonda and I, we're not .com billionaires. We don't, we're not Bitcoin billionaires. We, not trust fund babies. It's a husband and wife who sold an insurance policy, took some long-term incentive payout, and used that to get going with our 2014 and 2015 vintages, and about half of our 2016. And then since then, we've been funding it by taking a loan out against our retirement investments that we pay back as we
sell wine.
Mm-hmm. And so for us, doing it in a highly flexible, less leveraged way has worked out beautifully. And it'd be nice to have a winery. It'd be nice to have a tasting room. But we haven't had an issue selling wine. And the model that we came up with goes back to the old days of Stony Hill. If you've ever had any of their Chardonnays, back in the day, Stony Hill didn't offer anything retail. They didn't offer anything in restaurants. You had to order off of their mailing list. And that's the only way you got their very limited production Chardonnays. We were on the waiting list for 3 years before we on the mailing list. And the only reason we got on the mailing list is we went up there and talked to them. One time when we were in Napa, we drove up Spring Mountain and, had a nice little tour with the McRae's, and lo and behold, the next time we made it on the mailing list. And we stayed on the mailing list for, long time. So we looked at it and we said, okay, that has a certain amount of exclusivity. And exclusivity can drive a lot of wine sales. People like to acquire something they can't get,
or other people can't get,
or that other people can't get, and they like that exclusivity of it. So we wanted to create a smaller brand that was very boutique, and that was really sold by word of mouth and just by us.
And up until COVID, we did a lot of wine tastings, and we like to say that we bring the wine tasting room experience to people. So in their homes, if they want to get friends together that are wine lovers, and we've been all over actually doing wine tastings, and we just talk about the wines and talk to potential customers, and we end up selling a crap ton of wine at all those events.
And getting a lot of wine club members.
And so we basically sell out without having to have a capital expense. And, for us, it just makes more sense to do it that way. And our customers like it too. We've asked them a lot, like, what would you think if we were in retail or in restaurants? And I think to some people, they feel like it would maybe diminish the brand.
Now, how many I don't know if we were on mic when you said you're at about 500 cases.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're at about 500 cases. What were your 14 vintage? That was your first recovery.
A barrel of 2014 Howell Mountain Cabernet that rated 90 points and won a gold medal at San Francisco International when it had only been bottled for 3 months.
Very nice. Congratulations.
2016 Sauvignon Blanc. That was it. A barrel of each.
And we sold out in like 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's amazing what the rating and a medal in the San Francisco Chronicle can do for you. So you're growing. You're at about 500 cases now. And what we know you do Cab Franc, and I'm sorry, it's been like 40 minutes and I haven't tasted your Cab Francs, and I'm dying to taste your Cab Franc. So the first one I want to talk about is a 2018 Cabernet Franc. So as I'm pouring this is from Stagecoach. So I've got a whole bunch of questions about that. But so, oh, look at that color.
Also, I just wanted to say, even though we live in Austin, we do make our wine in Napa. We get that question a lot.
And
Yes.
we're back.
Yeah.
So let's go there before I actually taste. Where actually in Napa are you making your wine? You said a crush
In Napa.
facility.
In a little industrial park. They make wine for Dwayne Wade. They've made some of Crop Brothers wines. There's a lot of notable wine brands that are made there. Modus Operandi is made there. So it's a nice facility where they're able to offer services to be a little bit more bespoke for wine brands like ours.
Okay. And then you are the winemaker, Bruce? Do you have a consultant?
We meet with our consulting winemaker, and we kind of carve out our style. We carve out what we're looking for each vineyard. We do, we taste the wines along the way and discuss barrel aging strategy, what we're looking for. Ron and I aren't big oak people. You won't buy one of our wines and be bludgeoned by a bunch of oak. So we're always trying to keep.
That's a nice breath from Napa.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it, in balance and more in the background. So a lot of discussions about oak aging and strategy. We like to keep our acidity a little bit higher, so we don't want to, we don't want to pick it too high on a bricks level and have it be an alcohol-driven wine. We really want it to be kind of an old world meets Napa sort of style. We recognize that we're working with California fruit and Napa fruit, but we want it to be more expressive of an old world wine. And then Ron and I do all the blending. And so we're able to blend to our palates, but recognizing that our palate may not be exactly tuned into what the current wine consumer wants. So we try and straddle the fence on that between what we're really looking for versus what sells, because at the end of the day, you have to sell wine.
Right, absolutely. So now this is a 2018 Cabernet Franc from Stagecoach. So when did you harvest, if you don't know the exact date, but like early, late October, November, like?
It was in October, and I can go on the website and look. The interesting thing about the 2018 is the 2018 is the first vintage that we released that is predominantly its base varietal. It's not uncommon for us to be at 90 to 92 to 93% on the base varietal. Sometimes we've been as low as 88. And then we're blending back in to the wine, if it's a Cab Franc, we're blending back in Petit Verdot, maybe a little Malbec, maybe a little Cab to build it up, maybe a little Merlot. But 2018 was a near perfect vintage. And so we found for our palate, the wines were exceptional in barrel. So we really kind of scaled back how we blended the 2018s, and from top to bottom or across all of our portfolio, it's the first vintage we released that is predominantly the base varietal. So this was harvested on October 5th. It was 25.9. It's not uncommon for Stagecoach. This comes from the Pritchard Hill side of Stagecoach, so at about 1,400 feet. And it only spent 22 months in barrel, and it's kind of a mixture of new and used, 1 turn, 2 turn French oak.
I can get the French oak on the nose, but it is not, and I don't mean to be mean, it's not Napa oak, right. You can definitely know that there's new French oak on here.
Right.
What I really like is one of the things I love about Cab Franc is graphite. Like when I get graphite in Cab Franc, I'm a very, very happy camper. And that is there also. And it is on the dark fruit flavor side of it.
Right. And this is 99.25% Cab Franc. Through
See,
0.5.
there's the chemist. There's the chemist right down to 0.25.
It's 0.5 Petit Verdot
Oh,
and 0.25%
wow.
of Merlot. So the Merlot to add to kind of build out the mid palate a little bit, and the Petit Verdot to push it to the back palate. So you'll find that Rhonda and I, when we're blending a wine, we're looking to build up the entry of a wine. We want that entry to be present. We want it to get to your mid palate and be expansive and have texture and weight. And then we want it to go to the back palate, because I can't tell you how many high-end cabs I've purchased that have a ton of oak in them, high alcohol. You try it, it comes in nice, it gets to your mid palate, and then it just goes away.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, where was the rest of the experience? That's like
Right.
watching half a movie. It's like getting through, most of the seasons of Yellowstone and then not the last 2 seasons of Yellowstone. You feel cheated by that experience, right?
Right.
So for us, building up that mid palate to having it transition to the back palate is a lot of what we do in blending. And so to do that, we achieve it with, in the Cab Franc case, Petit Verdot and Merlot.
I find Petit Verdot is a very nice complement to Cab Franc. They play very nicely together, and when done in the right percentages, in the right relationship, it's a wonderful marriage between the two of them.
It is, and this Petit Verdot does come from Stagecoach.
Okay.
So.
And now what is your, I'm gonna know your answer by the wine itself, or I think I do, your thought process of pyrazine in Cab Franc.
We love Chanoins. We love Loire Valley Cab Francs. I don't mind in that redder fruit spectrum a little pyrazine. What I'm looking for, what we like with Cab Franc, is if we can get a touch of herbaceousness. Mm-hmm. I like, getting that little herbaceousness in the Cab Franc. It's really what I'm looking for. If it's a pure, clean expression of fruit without that herbaceousness, I'm at least on the aromatics left a little lacking. I don't mind the pyrazines in a redder fruit Cab Franc, and in most Cab Francs, I want just that touch of kind of floral herbaceousness.
I think you need herbaceousness to be a Cab Franc. I think that the people who love Cab Franc expect that bit of herbaceousness in there. People who don't know Cab Franc don't know the difference, and it can be a great Cab Franc with no herbaceousness, whatever. But I think if you're blind tasting, as a somm, as a wine expert, it's very difficult to call it a Cab Franc if you're missing that herbaceousness. I think it's part of the profile of a Cab Franc. So
our 2017 Cab Franc was rated well above 90 points. I think it was 92 or 93. It won a gold medal at San Francisco International. The 2018 was rated 93. The wine reviewer said it was the best Cab Franc he had in 12 months of tasting Cab Franc.
Wow.
And sent me a kind of a side note and told me that. So that was nice, and it's truly an exceptional wine. The 2019 we bottled. 2019 is kind of back to being a little bit more blended than the 2018. And that's just 2019s we kind of found across the board didn't have that round opulence of the 18s out of Napa. So for example, it's 93.75 Cab Franc, a little bit over 2% of PV, 1.3% of Malbec, actually.
Okay.
And then 0.75 Cab Sauv.
Okay.
So, but
So
still,
the Malbec, I can see where the Malbec's going to give a little bit of that spice, a little bit of, a little bit more of the spice and a little body zing. I don't know how exactly how to,
but it
and
adds
without
really nice. It adds
overpowering.
fullness and texture in the mid palate.
Mhm.
And the difference between Merlot and Malbec in the mid palate, you find that Merlot kind of influences the beginning of that mid palate to like just past the center of that mid palate. And then you find that Malbec in the blending process kind of picks up that middle of the mid palate toward the back end of the mid palate with nice weight and texture. So we find in a lot of cases that Malbec makes a very good transition to where the Petit Verdot picks up. And so that's if the wine needs that little push back toward the Petit Verdot, that's what we'll do.
That's a perfect explanation, because that's really, you want, like you said, you want it to come in and you want to have, you don't want a roller coaster. You don't want, nothing, right? You want it to be, exciting, but you want it to kind of carry itself through the entire palette. Now, going back to Stagecoach, I have to ask, like, did you have a little coronary when it was purchased by Ian J. Gallo? Is there an issue with potentially losing your fruit?
No, we were able to, protect our sources by, where we make our wine, kind of leveraging some of their contacts. So that's been good. We don't run a risk of losing that source, and we like being over in the Pritchard Hillside in the block that we're getting. If Jan Krupp owned it, and we've talked with Jan, and we've heard his story on Stagecoach, which is just remarkable, the number of boulders they moved out of there. I mean, the tons and tons and tons of boulders as they were developing the vineyard. If they own it or if Gallo owns it, it's still Stagecoach fruit, and it has that Stagecoach uniqueness to it. And there's something about Stagecoach wines. Every time I pour them into glass, and I can't tell you why, from Sequoia Grove Syrah to someone else's Cab to someone else's Cab Franc, you put your nose in there and you go, yeah, that's Stagecoach. It just has a signature.
Yep. Well, that's terroir right there, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I'm very prone to know is Rutherford dust. Like when you stick your nose in a Rutherford, whatever, there is that Rutherford dust, and that is what makes it Rutherford. I remember I was at a tasting, and it was a Mediterranean wine. It was, I was in New York City, it was Mediterranean. And I put my note, the Somm was from, the person who was doing the master class was from Napa area. And I put this wine up to my nose, and I'm like, this is like Rutherford Dust-esque. And he started laughing because I was the only other person in the room that could understand Rutherford Dust. Everybody else was not, and he's like, I know. I try to explain that to the people, but they're in, Mediterranean, Mideast somewhere, and they don't understand what Rutherford Dust is. But yeah, I agree. Stagecoach it's a historic site. These sites don't get to be that way, to be infamous, just because they have a cool name. There's a reason behind it. But
now, speaking of Rutherford, we produce 2 cabs from Rutherford.
Oh, okay.
We produce one from Bexo for George's Third.
All right.
We don't have access to the Bexo for George's Third name. We didn't sign that contract. So we call it Heritage Reserve. We'll refer to it as G3. The story is told in the back. Other wineries do that. Kirk Vanier does it. Ashes and Diamonds does it, where they call it something else, like Ashes and Diamonds Vineyard One, because it was Vineyard One for BV. That produces, kind of that classic, opulent, nice cab from Rutherford. We use another Bexo for vineyard called Melrose, which is up off of Zinfandel. So it's right at the junction of Rutherford and St. Helena.
Okay.
And it's separated from George's Third by about 2.5 miles, but it's a little different. It's a little redder in its fruit, which you wouldn't expect, being 2.5 miles further north. It has a little bit higher acidity profile, which kind of goes along with the redder fruit, but you also get a little bit more grippy tannin with it than you do from George's Third. And we looked at that as being like classic Napa Cab, classic Valley Floor Napa Cab, and just really nice. Now, surprisingly, the first year that we made the Beckstofer Melrose, which was 2018, 2018. I have to think about what year I'm in. That was scored 97 points.
Wow. Holy Casmoli.
And it won a double gold at San Francisco International.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. So that surprised us, but it actually scored higher than the George's Third did. And I think a lot of that's because the acidity is a little brighter, and the tannins just slightly grippier. Which at least when I taste that, when we taste it in our head, we go, okay, that's classic Napa, classic Rutherford.
So just sidebar, not really your winery or whatever, but isn't that email that you get when your score is in that email? Isn't that the most, like insane, nerve-wracking, push the button to open email ever? Or is it just me? Is it just me? I don't know.
Well,
it is exciting. And this time around, I was down in my office. We work at home. I was in my office. He was upstairs in his office, and I heard him saying some words from the other. No, we're my parent. We were with my parents.
That was last year when our Chardonnay won a double gold and was rated 97, which we stopped making Chardonnay, by the way.
Oh, my parents.
You get a 97 and you stop making it?
Well, Chardonnay's a hard
already made
sell.
that decision before we got to.
Chardonnay's
well, that's
sell.
true.
Ron Bauer's done a great job at creating a market, but has done a horrible job at creating market fatigue. And a lot of people don't want that big buttery oaky Chardonnay anymore. So we made one that was partial mallow.
Okay.
It didn't see any new French oak. It was 1 turn and 2 turn French oak. It came from Rogers Creek, which is used by Landmark and Ramey and a couple, some other people, very notable vineyard. And it produced wines with nice acidity. So we were able to preserve some of that acidity, and it really drank more like white Burgundy than it did a California Cabernet. Chardonnay.
Chardonnay.
But yet still with that, and with the 97 and with the double gold, so many people would say, I don't drink Chardonnay anymore. Don't pour me anymore.
The ABC crew. Yeah.
So, the effort to sell a bottle of highly rated Chardonnay, which is just a spectacular wine, versus this Cab Franc, it was easier to sell the Cab Franc than Chardonnay. So you got to go where your time investment, particularly when it's your own.
But it was so good.
Yeah. So we were actually having a dinner party when that email showed up, and there was 2 couples and us, and we had already been through like 2 bottles, maybe 3 bottles of wine throughout the course of the evening. And the email showed up, and I'm like, can I swear on this?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
I was like, holy shit. I told the whole table, holy shit, we just got a 97. We just got a gold medal, double gold. This is
I'm trying to remember who.
Rick and Heather.
Oh, and my parents.
And we're like, go get a bottle, open it up, let's try it. And we just had to try it.
Yeah. It's incredible. But every time I get the email from like Wine Enthusiast, I see Wine Enthusiast has rated your wine, I'm always like, I'm like, and then I'm like, woohoo, whatever. And then, the same thing, the San Francisco Chronicle came out on Friday, and, I'm sitting there, refresh. Nope, no scores yet. Refresh, no scores yet. Oh my God, scores are there. And then you go and, I don't know. It's so nerve-wracking, and then it's so exhilarating, thankfully exhilarating. But I just don't know if that's me or everybody like sees that.
No, it
everybody.
is. But here's the thing.
I mean, it's cool.
We don't send wine to the wine enthusiasts anymore because we think that over the 20 years or so that this big, huge, oaky, highly extracted style has been made, that's kind of geared a lot of people's palate to that, and that's what they look for.
Okay.
Our wines have a little bit more elegance to them, a little bit more old world style with new world fruit. And so we find that that style isn't conducive to what some wine reviewers are looking for. So you have to find a wine reviewer that appreciates your style, because not everyone does. So we end up using a wine reviewer who does a lot of work for Decanter and a couple other publications, who tastes wines from Washington and Oregon and California, and has a much more balanced palate, where they're able to appreciate wines with a little bit more subtlety and finesse versus, that huge sledgehammer. And that's why we like San Francisco International. It's a very international sort of group that judges, and they have a wide spectrum of what they're looking for in a wine.
And that's the only competition we enter.
It's the only one we
Only
have.
the San Francisco International. We did send our rosé to the wine enthusiast once.
We got 91.
And we got a 91.
Oh, that's
Rosé.
actually for a rosé.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
actually really good. But that is a very big topic. And I had another podcast. I do this thing called Wine Writers Wrap Up, where I get writers who come together and we talk about a topic. And that was one of the topics is, wineries, how much does it matter what that score is in the world? And how much does it matter that you get gold medals or silver medals, or, are people going to buy that wine or not buy that wine solely because of a score? And then is that score, does the winery or the winemaker, and sadly, there are people who I know who have out and out said, well, I make wine for that
Right.
wine score. Well, and I'm not saying that's a wrong way to go. You're going to get 95s and 96s all over the place. And there are people who are only going to who are going to find you because you have that 95 and 96. But is that the right way to make wine? I like how you say it's your palate. You kind of blend that fence of, you're making a wine that you enjoy to drink. You realize that everybody doesn't have your palate. So you're not going all the way to them, but you're not going all the way to you, and you're straddling that fence. And I think that's a perfect way to make a wine, to enjoy for the masses.
Well, and the other thing too is when we were able to have wine tastings, and we would talk to people about this is our style and this is why. And when you have other wines, this is, from Napa, this might be how you experience it, and this is how ours is different. And then you could see the light bulb go off. And then you realize they're like, wow, we really like this. And we like the back palate, and we like that it's not over oaked and it's not bludgeoning us over the head, and then we'll hear from them after the fact and say, thanks a lot. I could never, wine just doesn't taste the same anymore, because now all I get is that over oaked and no back finish. And dang it, I wish I had some of your wine instead.
We've gotten text messages from people in Napa. They've been to one of our more personalized wine tasting, and then they go to Napa and they're like, we wish we had your wine. Because all we're tasting are wines that have no finish, or too much oak.
Right.
And so, we don't want to make for that crowd that expects oak and high alcohol. We really want to make something that's really balanced and that has, the structure and the ability to age.
Well, I will say this 2018 Stagecoach Cab Franc is beautiful. It really is. It is extremely balanced. There is acid there. There is dark fruit. But what's interesting is, now I did open it a little bit earlier than we got on, but I didn't pour it. So we all know what the oxygen thing, we're not going to go into that. But I just poured a second glass, so it had a little bit more oxygen to it. And there's much more fruit coming out of it now than that first glass. And it, that little bit of oxygen has brought that up, and it's still dark fruit, but my first glass was more like a black cherry, a blackberry, that thing. I'm now getting plum. I'm still getting the black cherry, but now there's that plum, and talk about front, mid, or end palate. It is right on the end of the mid palate to the finish is where that plum comes in. So it's
Right.
almost like where the black cherry, wrong word, but dies off, like falls off, the
Yep.
plum comes in to carry it to the finish. So
Mm.
whatever you're doing, keep doing, because it's really is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
It's wonderful. But I do want to talk about, because we are coming up to an hour, and I don't want to, I don't want to miss this. So you do Cab Franc. Is that what you would say is your specialty?
No, well,
Cab Sauv?
We make 2 cabs.
Okay, right.
That's Merlot based. We make a Cab Franc
and we make a Sauvignon Blanc.
and a Sauvignon Blanc.
And,
Okay.
and we make a rosé that's Tempranillo and Mourvedre based.
And
Oh,
we
okay.
are doing a special project. We're making a Zinfandel
From
from
Monte Rosso.
Monte Rosso.
We're
Oh,
going back to our roots and making
roots.
Zinfandel first time since
Yeah, just a
1998.
special.
Well, I would love to try that because I'm a Zin girl. But let's talk about this cuvee. Okay,
Mhm.
so Rhonda, you said it was Merlot based?
It's Merlot based, yes.
Okay.
And we didn't want to call it Merlot because
Yes, smart
we
thinking.
and so we made it as a special project for an art gallery who wanted to serve wine to their high-end art clients. And so we ended up making this wine for them. And then people really liked it. And we found that when we sold, this was the 3rd wine that we made. And so we originally had the Sauvignon Blanc, the Cab, and then the Merlot-based cuvee. And we found that people really liked it. And it kind of sold 1-to-1 with our Cab. And I love it because I'm a steak girl.
Okay.
And I just love it with steak. I just think it smells great and it's really yummy.
So to
So-
answer your question in a couple ways, Rhonda's favorite wine that we produce is the Cuvée. My favorite wine that we produce is the Cab Franc.
Okay.
We weren't huge cab drinkers. So when we got back into making wine, we wanted to make Zinfandel, and this winery consultant that we were working with said, go to a high-end store that sells a lot of wine, good turnover. Pick a cab in the price point you want to be in, go 3 bottles back, put a pencil mark on the back of that label. Do the same thing with the Zinfandel and put a pencil mark 3 bottles back, and then go back every week and see what's moved. And I'll guarantee you within the first 2 weeks, that cab will have been sold. And you'll probably be coming back for 6 months waiting for that Zinfandel to be sold. So we went, holy crap.
We're making Cab.
We're making cab. Once again, it's our money.
It's our money.
And so we had to taste a lot of cabs, and we had to drink a lot of cabs to get kind of calibrated back to what people were doing with cabs, because we were drinking, Riojas and Burgundies and Rhone wines and everything else but cab. So we're not big cab drinkers, even though we make 2, and one scored 97 points. So she goes for the Cuvée, I go for the Cab Franc, and those are our 2 favorite wines.
And what is your largest production wine?
Cab.
Cab. Okay. All right. So let's get back to this cuvee, because it says cuvee number 4. 4 grape varieties?
No.
every year we change with every vintage, we change the number.
Oh,
So-
okay. So this is your 4th vintage.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so this is 93% Merlot,
Okay.
3% Petit Verdot, 2.25 Cab Sauv, 0.75 Cab Franc to pretty up the aromatics in the entry, and 0.5% Malbec to help with that
Right.
mid to mid back transition. So we, it's basically 93% Merlot, but it's a hillside vineyard. It's Bill Hill's Broken Rock Vineyard, about 800 to 1,200 feet up on the flanks of Atlas Peak. So you get a little Valley Floor influence, you get a little Atlas Peak influence with nice hillside structure. It drinks more like a baby cab. There's great darker fruits. There's graphite. There's cocoa. It is truly a phenomenal wine. It's our entry wine where it's priced. We want people to
Or
buy
entry
it,
red,
entry red, buy it, enjoy it. But it is within itself, really drinks more like a right bank wine than a left bank wine. And that's what we're going for.
Perfect. Perfect. So without a tasting room, how can people find your wines to taste? How can they get your wine?
Well, there's a couple of things that we can do. We've now become acclimated to holding Zoom tastings. So we sell people our wine slightly over our cost. And then we go through a tasting with them.
Okay.
That way they can get a bottle and we can, go through a tasting as we would if it was a private tasting in person.
And that's like through a Zoom?
Through Zoom, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And in this age of COVID, it seems to be
Virtual tastings are all the rage. Yep.
We, when COVID dies down a little bit, we'll get back to in-person tastings, and those are more like, a Mary Kay event or an Avon event where, we kind of come to you and we bring the wine and we charcuterie and it gives us a chance to interact more with people. And, we've all been to those tasting rooms where the guys, or woman's pouring and they go, our winemaker really likes this vineyard, thinks it's exceptional. Here's the wine. Hope you enjoy it. And they walk away and you're left there with a ton of questions.
Mm-hmm.
But we're able to tell everybody all the information. Why do we make the decision?
Because it's your wine.
Decision to blend this way. Why did we add 3% of Petit Verdot? Why do we only use medium toast oak? We're able to walk through all of that with people. So they get the full story. And it creates a great experience. I think one other thing to say, and at the chagrin of this wine consultant that we use, we are constantly told, and we've been told this since our inception, that we need to increase our prices, but we refuse to. And so our wines are priced for Napa very reasonable. The Speckstofer George's Third is $95 a bottle. It should be $125. And then we offer our wine club members a 20% discount. So they get it for $76. Our Howell Mountain Cab, which we just released, a 2019 Howell Mountain, which is just beautiful.
I love Howell Mountain.
All day long. This comes from a former vineyard source of Catherine Hall in Howell Mountain. And we're sourcing from there. That's $100. It should be $125 to $150.
How much is our Cab Franc?
Cab Franc is $68.
Wow. Okay.
And we, for wine club members, there's a 20% discount. And our whole philosophy is we want you to experience the wine. Wine's expensive to begin with.
And we want to sell wine.
But
I'm the voice of reason.
But we want the difference of a great wine and being the price, and I don't want to pay that. We want you to buy a really well-crafted, really made wine from exceptional vineyards.
And be able to experience that.
Be able to experience it at a reasonable price, and so that's what we do.
So I just want to say, if somebody who's listening wants to try their wines, they can just order from your website, or are you?
Okay. Yeah, you can go to our website, prothrofamilywines.com. A good way to remember our last name is Prothro, like a pro throws a ball without the W. That's the only way I can remember his last name.
Even though he passed the test.
Yes. And then Bruce's email address is on there, and he always responds.
It's just Bruce at Prothro Family Wines. So,
I did see on the website, it says email Bruce, email Rhonda, right? You have down on the bottom. Email Bruce.
Yeah, but just email me and express an interest, and create a profile on the website, and we give most everyone some sort of discount if it's not the wine club discount, and we just go from there.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on. I had a blast. Your wine is fantastic. I'm not going to lie. My husband is going to be a little upset because he's expecting wine when he comes home, but it's 2 hours before he comes home. So he's not going to have very much of this Cab Franc left. But I am making flatbread pizza for dinner. So question one is going to be, and see if you go with my brain. One is going to be just normal pizza with Roma tomatoes and all that. And the other one is going to be fig and arugula pizza. Now, which one, if either or none, do you think is a better pairing?
Well, the bitterness from the arugula is going to create a challenge for any wine, any red wine, right? Unless it's a little bit higher in alcohol, like a Chianti. I mean, a little bit higher in acidity and brighter fruit. But I would actually go with the cuvee.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot in that cuvee.
Okay.
And there, you know, the cuvee, it drinks beautifully. It's just a wonderful wine. And this 2018 was rated 91. And I think there's enough there to complement both types of flatbread pizzas. And it'll go wonderful with the figs. Absolutely wonderful.
And it sounds great.
It does sound great.
We wish we could be right there.
I'm not gonna lie, this fig arugula pizza that I make, I made it once and he was like, this is a staple. You're making this all the time. So
that sounds
Throw some
really
prosciutto on there.
yes. I
sounds
might,
wonderful.
if there's time to run out, I might go do that. But I just got the shaved Parmesan and the
Perfect.
arugula and fig. So yes.
That'd be perfect.
But thank you so much for joining me. The
Thank
wine is
you.
spectacular. And as much like this, I don't want to sound this. I am the Cab Franc maniac, so it's like an additional little pat on the back when
Well, thank you. We
when I
appreciate
really
it.
I really
Try
do
your-
love it.
Yeah, we do need to try yours.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Maybe when you're back in California for a visit or whatever, we will do a get together and a bottle share, and you know, we'll
That'd be great.
hopefully be way past COVID and although fully vaccinated and boosted, so we're good. But yeah, I would love to. You both are wonderful, and even before we got on, I was having a blast talking to you too. So I would love to meet you in real life.
Be great.
But thank you very much, and I wish you the best. And I saved a
you.
little
Cheers.
swig for me to say
Cheers.
sláinte. Thank you.
Thank you.